Hello and welcome to the CAF Red Tail Squadron Meet A Tuskegee Airman conference call. My name is Cheryl and I will be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. During the question-and-answer session, if you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please note that this conference call is being recorded. I will now turn the conference call over to your host, Doug Rosendahl. Doug, you may begin.
Thank you, Cheryl. Welcome to the Commemorative Air Force Red Tail Squadron Meet a Tuskegee Airmen special event. We're happy you're joining us this evening to hear from Dr. Harold Brown, a friend of the CAF Red Tail Squadron, an original Tuskegee Airman who flew with the famed 332nd Fighter Group in World War II and a good friend of mine. My name is Doug Rosendahl, and I'm your Commemorative Air Force Red Tail Squadron leader. First, I'd like to thank you for joining us. It's through your support that we're able to host this special event and tell the triumphant story of the Tuskegee Airmen to generations of Americans all across the country and beyond. As you may already be aware, I'm one of the original founding members of the CAF Red Tail Squadron and have been a part of the squadron for 20 years. It's interesting to note that yesterday I picked up the airplane at Bemidji, Minnesota from our winter maintenance, and it's on its way to Dallas tomorrow to begin our air show season, so we're really excited about that. As I said before, it's because of you that we've been able to share the lessons and the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen with over 230,000 visitors in 39 states over the past 7 or 8 years with our mobile traveling exhibit. We do this by traveling to air shows, schools, community events with our airplane and with the mobile exhibit, telling the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. Our mission is to educate audiences across the country about the history and the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, America's first black military pilots and their support personnel. We seek to inspire others to rise above obstacles in their own lives by telling the stories of the Tuskegee Airmen's strength of character, courage, and their ability to triumph over adversity. Each year, we receive thousands of letters from children thanking us for sharing the Tuskegee Airmen's inspirational stories and how they have been inspired to aim high and never quit. Lessons they have learned from visiting us and our unique educational resources their teachers have used in the classroom. We are able to make a difference in so many lives because of the support folks like you have generously, because of the support of folks like you who have generously supported our mission. With your support, we are able to continue our hard work and expand our reach to create new educational outreach programs like tonight's special event that will be able to impact even more people. Again, we thank you for your support in the past. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Harold Brown. Over the next 40 minutes, Dr. Brown will tell his story, the story of a small group of black pilots and support personnel, the Tuskegee Airmen, who fought for the right to fly in World War II and whose success played a significant role in the integration of the military. In his book titled Keep Your Airspeed Up, The Story of a Tuskegee Airman, and it's available for purchase on the CAF Red Tail website at redtail.org. Stay tuned for instructions on how you can participate in the question and answer segment at the end of the presentation, and we'll get to that shortly. But first, we want to talk with Dr. Brown. I hope you're inspired by Dr. Brown as he speaks about prevailing against the odds. Harold, thank you for being a mentor to us at the Red Tail Squadron, an advisor to us over all these years. I'm sure that our audience is going to enjoy hearing your story as much as I've enjoyed learning from you in these years and have had the pleasure to spend all this time together telling this story. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Dr. Brown, and take it away.
First, it's a pleasure, of course, to have this opportunity to talk about the Tuskegee Airmen. As you would expect, it's one of my favorite topics. But let me talk about myself, how I became interested in flying, and the road that I took to become a little second lieutenant with pilot wings on May the 23rd in 1944. Now, I was born and raised up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And way back yonder when I was about 11 years old and in the 6th grade, I fell in love with airplanes. I've often asked myself what in the world caused it, and I have no idea why or how it happened, but it just happened. And on that next morning, I decided at that early age that I was going to become a military pilot. And of course, one of the reasons for that was that I certainly couldn't afford to pay for my own flying lessons, so what better way than to go to the military and let them give me the finest instructions I could possibly get. Well, after making that tremendous decision way back yonder, I, like most young kids, started building model airplanes, which I continued on for the next 5, 6, 7 years or so. And that became a passion of mine. I read every book I could find about the military. I can recall one book I used to read regularly. Every Saturday morning, I would go to the library, and the name of the book was Randolphville, Texas, West Point of the Air. And that was one of the primary training bases with the United States Army Air Corps back during those early years. But this is how I spent most of my life. Finally, when I was about 16 years old and in the 11th grade, I managed to save up $35. Now that was a whole lot of money. Quite often when I talk to youngsters, I will usually ask them, considering inflation and the rest of it, how much do you think that $35 would be worth today? And of course, they would hee-haw around and whatnot. And then I would give them the answer, which is about $785. So I said, have any of you guys got $785 in your pocket? If you do, then you had the equivalent of my $35 that I had in my pocket. And a big chuckle and so forth. Well, I took my little $35 and out to Ward Chamberlain, found the fixed base operator, and asked him the very simple question, I would like to take flying lessons. Well, back in those days, dual flight instruction was running about $7 an hour, dual instruction, which meant for $35 I could get in 5 lessons. Now, it was my hope that I could raise another $35 and continue my flying lessons. But after I took those first 5 lessons, I was out of money, and unfortunately, I didn't have enough money to continue. So that was a very brief introduction of Harold Brown into the flying business. I was 16 years old at the time that happened. Now, most of all of that occurred way back in 1940 or so. And keep in mind, we were not at war at that time. But I used to deliver the weekly black newspapers. And I had kept up to date of the big debate that was going on. We had those people that were supporting us, trying to get into military flight training, and of course the establishment, the generals and so forth, was denying us that opportunity. No, that would be a complete waste of money. And they based that upon a report that came out in November of 1925 by the War College. And the title of that report was The Use of Negro Manpower During Wartime. Now, the sample that they used, and let's assume that they did use a sample and it was the best sample they had. Unfortunately, it was a sample of perhaps the worst educated people on the lowest rung of the social economic ladder, having a very difficult time. And obviously, if you were to look at that group of people, you can imagine the results that they got as they studied them, as they asked a variety of questions, and as they used those same people in the military. Being uneducated and all the rest of it, obviously, they were not capable of flying. But the tragedy is that they took that very small sample and they applied that to a complete whole group of people, a group of people that represented 10% of the population in the United States. And that is the report they used to describe those 10% of the people, color folks in the United States at that time. And you can imagine some of the things that came out in the report. Very briefly, didn't have the intelligence, cowards, made extremely poor leaders, a complete waste of time, no way would they ever be capable of flying a complicated fighter aircraft. It was just out of the question. And based upon that, they said no, and they refused to train it. That was the beginning of a great big debate that started back in the late 30s, and it continued for the next few years or so. It wasn't until sometime in 1940, March of 1940 to be exact, that Roosevelt finally, after listening to all of the arguments, pro and con and the rest of it, made the decision to have one squadron, the 99th Fighter Squadron, consisting of 35 pilots and 27 aircraft. That was announced in March of 1941. And in July of 1941, they named the first class. In that first class, there were 13 people. One was a West Point graduate, a captain in the military, and the other 12 were all civilians. But all of them were college graduates. 3 of them had master's degrees, and a couple of them had completed everything except the dissertation for their PhD. Now, those group of 13 didn't look anything like the sample of people that they were using to describe this whole population. There was no similarity. But nevertheless, that was the first class, and they started in July of 1941. Keep in mind, the war had not started for us yet. We did not go into the war until December the 8th, a day after Pearl Harbor was bombed. So this all started before Pearl Harbor ever happened. With that first class, 5 of the 13 successfully completed the program. Now, they only had one standard program that was applied throughout the Army Air Corps in the flight training. Everyone followed the exact same schedule. No deviations, nothing. We were also on that exact same schedule. That schedule provided for a class to graduate approximately every 5 weeks. And this is what happened with us. The first class graduated in March of 1942, and 5 weeks later, another class graduated, and so forth. So there were 5 guys in the first class, 3 guys in the second class 5 weeks later. That was 8 of them. The next class produced 4 of them. So 8, 5, and 3 plus 4 were now up to 12. And then for the next class, this is what they did. they had started a civilian pilot training program in 1939. The thought being that graduates of this program could bypass pre-flight and primary and only need to complete the last 50% of the program, which was basic and advanced, and you had yourself a qualified pilot. 6 of the predominantly black schools were part of that program. And the best of those 6 colleges was Tuskegee Institute. They had the most outstanding program that far excelled those in the other 5 schools. That was partially the reason why Tuskegee was selected to be, quote, the training base for training black pilots. After the first, let me go back, after they had reached July of 1942, they had the first complement of 35 pilots, 27 aircraft, and the 99th was all ready to go overseas. They passed their preparation for overseas assignment in September of that year, and then they set. Now, during that same time, General Clark of the 5th Army was in North Africa fighting General Rommel, the Desert Fox, who was one of the outstanding German generals. He needed all the help that he could get. And you would think that they would have gotten that 99th Fighter Squadron over there ASAP since they were all ready to go, but they didn't. They sat there in September, October, November, December, January, and by that time, the same people who had been supporting us began screaming, "Why haven't you gotten an assignment for the 99th Fighter Squadron?" Well, they eventually did, and the 99th Fighter Squadron went overseas on April the 1st of 1943. And they were in combat in North Africa doing tactical support of the ground troops. Now, the program is continuing to turn pilots out every 5 weeks. They formed the 100th Fighter Squadron, and then shortly thereafter, they formed the 332nd Fighter Group, consisting of the 100th, the 301st, and the 302nd. They were handling all of the additional pilots that were being graduated at that time. Now, that continued until that group went overseas in January of 1944. In the meantime, coming back to Harold Brown, after I graduated from high school in 1942, I immediately, at 17 years of age, I immediately went down to set for the exams. I passed them, but then all of my paperwork went to Washington, D.C., where they made the selection. Now, unfortunately, everyone else who took those exams with me, people that looked different than I did, were sworn into the reserve. This meant that they were safe and they would never have to face the draft. Guys like me, whose paperwork had to go to Washington, we were not sworn into the reserve, so we were subject to the draft. So there were many of the black guys who sat for the exams and was waiting to see if they had been selected or not. But unfortunately, they were drafted into the Army and never even gotten the opportunity. to go into military flight training. I was very fortunate. I waited for approximately 6 months, and in December of 1942, I received a letter stating I had been selected. In January of 1943, I had to go down, volunteer for the military with my letter, and the letter was instructions for where I would be sent for first basic training down to Biloxi, Mississippi for several weeks, and then up to Tuskegee Institute. Now, when I arrived up at Tuskegee Institute, this was a new program. They were now selecting high school kids, whereas before they only wanted college people into the program. With that new program in which they were selecting high school kids, they also started something called College Training Detachment. So when those high school kids wound up at Tuskegee, they had a program in which we took courses anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending upon the scores that we made on our entrance examination. And that is the route that I took. I wound up in Tuskegee sometime around March or so. I was there for approximately 4 months up into July, August. I then was transferred to Tuskegee Army Airfield, and there's where I became an Air Corps Flying Cadet. My program lasted approximately 40 weeks, and I graduated as a second lieutenant on May the 23rd of 1944. After approximately 2 months of fighter training down in Wallaboro, South Carolina, there were 15 of us in my group. We were then sent overseas, and I joined the 332nd Fighter Group sometime around in October of 1944. And that's where I started then my whole career as a fighter pilot in the 332nd Fighter Group. Let me say just a couple of things about the fighter group. The 15th Air Force, of which we were a part of, there were 2 strategic air forces. The 8th Air Force, that was flying from east to west out of England over into Europe. They could put up 2,000 bombers, 1,200 fighters, for an armada of 3,200 aircraft maximum effort. That was the largest contingent of aircraft to ever fly, ever. In the 15th Air Force, which didn't come into being sometime later, we were only a third of the size. We only had about 600 bombers, and we had 7 fighter groups, 4 P-51 groups, and 3 P-38 groups. We were flying from north to south and hitting most of the targets in southern Europe. And of course, our job as fighter pilots, not only in the 8th Air Force, but we were assigned to in the 15th, was to protect the bombers. When General Akers called B.O. Davis after they had arrived in Naples in January of 1944, in March, he called B.O. Davis up and said, "How would you like a new assignment? How would you like to become a part of 15th Air Force Fighter Command and escorting bombers from Italy deep in enemy territory up in Europe?" Of course, Bill Davis was extremely happy, and that was just the assignment that he was looking for. That decision was made in March. 3 months later, the 332nd had moved from Naples to Ramitelli, and that was their new fighter base, and they were assigned to the 15th Air Force Fighter Command, and they were flying escort missions protecting the bombers, B-17 and B-24s, from Italy deep up into Germany. And that was their assignment, and that is what they did for the rest of the war. It is interesting because Akers' philosophy was that the fighters should stick with the bombers and protect the bombers up over the target and bring them home safely. There was another train of thought that was going on at the same time that no, that was a bad strategy. A better strategy was to have large groups of aircraft do fighter sweep ahead of the bombers, hit many of the German airfields, and then the bombers will follow them unescorted and unprotected to drop their bombs up in Europe. Well, Akers' view prevailed, and that is how Bill Davis ran his outfit. Matter of fact, I can recall as I first joined the outfit, he spoke to us and he said, "Gentlemen, I have just one requirement of you. When you go up on a mission, your job is to protect those bombers. And under no conditions will you ever leave the bombers except if you are attacked by enemy aircraft. If you ever do leave the bombers going off looking for personal victories, you can come home with 10 victories. But when you get back to the base, I will court-martial you and you will never fly again." So that was our job. That was our job as dictated by our group commander. We followed those commands religiously. We stuck with the bombers. And all of a sudden, the bombers are wondering, who are these new P-51s with the red tails who are sticking up so close to us? And they didn't know who was flying them, at least not initially. But the word soon got out, and it reached a point where the bomber boys were starting to request, "Hey, we want the red tails as fighter escort on our mission." As a matter of fact, it became so prevalent of the bombers requesting us that B.O. Davis changed the name of his aircraft to By Request, was the name that he put on his aircraft. Well, it wasn't too long before they nicknamed us the Red Tail Angels, and we did a fantastic job, an outstanding job. And I think it was primarily because of that. And after the war ended, when Truman in 1947, they first changed it from the United States Army Air Corps to the United States Air Force. And in 1948, President Truman announced that he was going to integrate the military, which he did in 1949. And we all went to the four winds. Now, I've been yakety here for almost 25, 30 minutes or so. I thought I had about 25 minutes, so I'm about 5 or 10 minutes over. So perhaps I need to turn it back over to Doug, and I'm ready for any questions you might want to ask me or whatever. Okay, Doug?
Okay. Well, first of all, Harold, I could listen to you talk all night. And it's, I've heard your story and many others, and it's always always pick up a few new things every time I hear the stories, and I really appreciate it. And that's what we're trying to do, is keep those stories alive. But before we open it to everybody else, I've got one question that I've asked you and asked others. So I just, I get to fly the Mustang now, and by today's standards, it's just an amazing airplane. There's no other way to describe it. But I can't imagine what it would be like for a how old were you when you got to Europe? When you first flew the Mustang, that was in Europe, obviously. So how old would you have been?
I was 20 years old, fought the war, was a POW for a couple of months, came home 20 years old, wasn't old enough to vote, couldn't go down to the bar and have a beer, but I said, if you don't give me a beer, I'm going to start World War III.
So what was it like for a 20-year-old kid in 1944 to climb a P-51 Mustang? I just can't imagine what that had to be like.
It was, I cannot think of any experience during my whole career of flying that was any more exciting than that. There was no question the P-51 Mustang was perhaps the finest reciprocating engine fighter ever at that time. The only aircraft that I would compare it with was I flew all of the straight-wing jet subsonic aircraft. And the F-86, which I flew, was almost the equivalent, only it was a subsonic straight-wing jet, but it was the outstanding jet. But the P-51 was the outstanding prod job. Just absolutely fantastic.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I've flown a lot of different airplanes, and it's a truly amazing airplane. So let's go back to our operator, Cheryl. If you want to open it up and take some questions, we'll see if we can answer them.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you are using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up your handset first before pressing any numbers. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. And our first question comes from Donald Sargent. Sir, your line is open.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. My brother-in-law, John Bell, was a Tuskegee Airman Class 44I, and I'm wondering if you knew him or were in the same class.
No, I was in Class 44E, and what was your brother's name again?
Brother-in-law, John Bell.
John Jack Bell.
John Bell. Nope, I did not know a John Bell. So he would have been, I was in E, so he would have been FGHI, just about 4 classes behind me. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, 44I was the last graduating class to go overseas to fight the war. Matter of fact, George Hardy, who is one of our Tuskegee Airmen who does a lot of work with the Red Tail Squadron, he was in 44I. And I believe that George Hardy had enough time to get in something close to 18 to 20 missions. But that was the last class to be sent overseas. And but by the time that he got overseas, I had already been shot down, and I was a POW by then, because I was shot down in March of 1945. And that is just about the time that 44I arrived overseas. So, no, I never met the gentleman.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Alan Burnett. Sir, your line is open.
Yes, Dr. Brown, what prison camp were you at?
I was at 2. The first one was at Nuremberg. The Americans were advancing pretty rapidly. So after being in Nuremberg, I don't know, for something close to a couple of weeks, they marched us down to Moosburg. Moosburg was about 30 kilometers north of Munich. And it was at Moosburg they had thousands of prisoners in Moosburg. And as you can imagine, the Americans were advancing from the west, the Russians were advancing from the east, and the whole thing was just collapsing. And everything was moving inland into Germany. And that is where I was liberated out of Moosburg when General Patton came through. That was on April the 29th when Patton came through, knocked the wires down, and the war was over for us.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Our next question comes from Mary Drummer. Mary, your line is open.
Hi. How did you use your experience in the war and being a pilot? How did you integrate that experience into your career?
Well, I was very, very fortunate. Being an officer as young as I was, I stayed in for 23 years, retired lieutenant colonel. I had the opportunity to do a great deal of work, primarily in management at the higher levels. I was in SAC for my last 10 years in the military. I was in a SAC command post for my final 5 years. And as a SAC controller, we had total responsibility for not only the daily operations of all of the aircraft, but we were also in control of the alert force. And we had a third of the entire SAC fleet constantly on alert. And I got opportunities to manage at a very high level operationally, which really prepared me for when I retired. I retired, I was 40 years old, and I used much of my experience for the rest of my life. But it was invaluable experience, and it certainly prepared me for a lot of the work I did after I left the military.
Thank you, sir.
Our next question comes from Carrie Crothers. Carrie, your line is open.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I have two young Tuskegee Airmen in the back of my truck that would like to ask you a question, please.
Well, how
Hello,
old are they?
My name is Jaden. 13. Well, I'll let him tell you, sir. The first one is Jaden. I am 13, sir.
You're 13.
I'm 12.
Okay, that's a pretty good age. What's the next one's age?
I am 12, sir.
Well, both you guys were older than I was when I made my decision to become a military pilot. I was only 11 years old when I made my decision. But what questions do you have for me?
I wanted to know how many different kinds of aircraft you fly.
Well, throughout my entire career, I flew a total of 22 different aircraft. Now, that was most unusual. But now that was most unusual. And the reason why I was fortunate enough to fly so many aircraft is that for 3 years of my career, I was working at the Far East Air Material Command, and it was at the Air Command that we did major repair on aircraft. And after every aircraft underwent major repairs, it had to be test flown. So I had an opportunity to fly all of the straight wing jets. We were handling all of the military aircraft, and this was during the Korean War over in Japan. We were taking care of all of their aircraft. They had 5 aircraft, L5s, L16s, L17s, L19s, L20s. I don't know if those names mean everything for you. And then I was fortunate enough to fly twin-engine aircraft. I flew the C-45, I flew the Convair 202, and then I flew the B-25 Mitchell bomber while I was going back to school to become.
I love those airplanes.
Oh, you do, huh? Well, good for you.
Yes, sir. And then Gabriel had a question, sir. Sorry.
Okay. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, Gabe.
That's all right. You go right ahead.
How much joy did you feel joining the military and getting chosen?
Wow. When I received my papers that I had been selected, I did flip-flops, just what I had wanted. And you know, it is, and you know, let me tell you how very fortunate. You know, we all have dreams as youngsters. And my dream was to become a pilot. And as I thought about it and I continued with that dream became my passion. And as I grew older and older, the passion only increased. So here I was fortunate enough to live my dreams out. And I think I was so lucky to become precisely what I dreamed of becoming. And that doesn't happen to everybody. But it happened in my life, and I was extremely fortunate that it worked out that way.
Helen, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're
We
more than
appreciate-
welcome. Hey, you guys stay in school. I don't want to hear about any C's or D's. It's A's and B's. And remember, whatever you might dream, and dream big, you make sure you follow your dreams. You understand?
Yes, sir. Tell him thank you for making
All right, you better
Thank
do
you
it.
for making it possible.
Our next question comes from John. John, your line is open. Hello, John.
Well,
our next question comes from Dave. Dave, your line is open.
thank you, Dr. Brown, for your service. Two-part question. Who was your crew chief? And could you secondly, describe your relationship with your crew chief? And then also, you're always welcome to come speak to the Heart of America Wing in Kansas. We'd love to have you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Well, my crew chief was Staff Sergeant Brown, and I can't remember his first name, but he was about 7-8 years older than I was. And Sergeant Brown, he had his rules for me flying his aircraft. And I mean, this guy was always right there. And when it came time for me to fly, I would check with Sarge, how's the aircraft? He says, it's all ready to go, Lieutenant. And we would fly a mission. We would come back after six and a half hours or so, land our aircraft. And as we taxied off of the runway, your crew chief was there waiting for you. And he would jump on your wing tip, and he would direct you into your revetment area. He watched every landing I would make, and he would let me, hey, Lieutenant, you're getting a little sloppy with my airplane, damn it. I'm working on this airplane half the night, and the least you can do is land it properly. I said, well, Chief, I, occasionally bounce them in, but it doesn't happen too often. It shouldn't happen at all. Get your act together. I'm telling you. Let me
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your service. I really appreciate your story.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Our next question comes from John. John, your line is open.
My question is, what advice do you have for young people trying to achieve our dreams when we face challenges?
Do precisely what the Tuskegee Airmen did. We faced every challenge that was thrown at us. And what happened? We rose above each and every one of them. And this is what the exhibit all about, is what Doug was talking about earlier, is that we want to take the lessons of the Tuskegee Airmen into every classroom in this country. For one thing only, dream big, aim high, You can become anything you want to become. And when things aren't going so well, think about the Tuskegee Airmen and what they went through. Use those guys as your examples. And, hey, if we can do it, you can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Our next question comes from Alex Crothers. Alex, your line is open.
Hello, Dr. Brown. Those were my two sons, and thank you for your words. I talk in schools all the time, and one of the questions I get is, why would the Tuskegee Airmen, men and women, raise their right hand and swear to defend this country when it was so obvious that, all the slavery trappings were all still there, the discrimination, all of that? Why would you all raise your hand to defend this country?
Oh, that's very, very simple, in my opinion. I was a citizen of the United States of America. This was my country, too. Even though it had some shortcomings, it was still the greatest country in the world. There was no other country that I would ever trade for it. But a friend of mine, Chuck Dryden, wrote a book called The A Train, and in it he talks about the capacity of the United States to make changes. And that was the one thing that kept him going, is that he honestly believed that this country had the capacity to become all of the great things that they wanted to become. And that is what kept his belief going. And that, for the most part, kept my belief going, even today. Now, I am very, very optimistic. Sure, we got problems and whatnot, and we'll probably have problems at least throughout my lifetime, but the problems, I believe, are becoming fewer and fewer and fewer. And one day, perhaps during your children's lifetime, I think all those problems are going to vanish. I think it will happen.
I do too, sir. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
I'm sorry. Our next question comes from Harold Murphy. Harold, your line is open.
Dr. Brown, Lieutenant Brown, Lieutenant Colonel Brown. I'm Harold Murphy. My father, the same namesake, flew B-17s in the 15th Air Force and was escorted by the 332nd. So I really thank you for your service.
Let me ask you a question. Is your father still amongst us?
No, he passed away a number of years ago.
Okay. Would you by chance know what group he was in? What did you say he was flying B-17s?
B-17s out of Foggia. Did you ever fly out of Foggia?
Oh, yeah. The B-17s, all part of the 15th, that was all part of the 5th Bomb Wing. We only had one wing of B-17s, which consisted of 5 groups of B-17s. Everything else we had were all B-24s. As a matter of fact, it was the B-17s that made the only bomb run to Berlin. That was on March the 23rd of 1945. The B-24s did not go up, but only the 5th Bomb Wing went up to bomb Berlin. And that was the only mission that the 15th Air Force made to Berlin. But the 5th Bomb Wing did it.
I see. He was a part of the 5th Bomb Wing from November of 43 to November of 44, so I think you just missed him.
So, okay, so he probably just missed that mission. Okay.
Yeah. He flew the Ploesti mission August 9th, 1944. He flew the Ploesti mission, and Chuck McGee was on that mission as well. So Chuck McGee was one of his P-40 escort pilots that day. Did you know Colonel Charles McGee?
He was a very, very dear friend of mine.
Wonderful.
He is. As a matter of fact, I thought that he would probably be on this program with me tonight, but for some reason or other, I'm certain he was busy. He just couldn't make it.
Well, when you see him next time, you tell him that Harold Murphy's son thanks him for saving his life.
I'll be more than happy to give him that message.
Thank you. That's all I have.
You're welcome.
And speakers, that completes our question and answer session.
Thank you. So thank you, Harold. Yeah, it's really been a real thrill and a treat to listen to your words tonight. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed your words. Go ahead.
It's a lot of fun.
Yes, it is. It's fun for us at the Red Tail Squadron to be able to keep your stories out there in front of the public. Really enjoyed your interaction with the kids. That was great. That's why we do this. For the young man that asked, how you do it, the Red Tail Squadron has what we call the 6 guiding principles. Aim high, believe in yourself, use your brain, be ready to go, never quit, and expect to win. And we have those printed on a dog tag that we give to kids who tour the exhibit all across the country. I'd also like to remind people that Dr. Brown's book, Keep Your Airspeed Up, The Story of a Tuskegee Airman, is available on our website, redtail.org. And you'd really enjoy the book. It's a great read. I've read it myself. And so check that out. This webinar is going to be recorded. I have to apologize. I know some of you, including myself, were not able to see the slides on the online version, and we apologize for that profusely. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but we will get to the bottom of it. But this event has been recorded, and it will be edited and just trimmed up a little bit, and it will be available on our website. We're going to have a new heading on the website for our webinars. So you'll be able to see that there. And again, I said at the beginning, yesterday I picked up and made the first flight of the 2018 season on the Red Tail, and tomorrow I'm taking it to Dallas, where we'll do our spring pilot training, and then we'll be out all across the country. We'd encourage you to check our calendar on our 2018 season of events. We travel all over the country with the airplane and the exhibit. For those of you who don't know about the exhibit, it's a traveling exhibit, a 53-foot mobile theater that opens up into a 180-degree screen. Tells the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, and we've captured a lot of stories of the original Tuskegee Airmen, including Colonel McGee. He plays a big role in that experience as well. So it's because of the support of our supporters like all of you who joined us tonight that we're able to do this. And we would encourage you to go again to our website, and thank you for your past support, and I look forward to your support in the future. And finally, again, thank you, Harold, and to all who have joined us this evening. We hope to do more of these, and we plan to get the technical issues resolved so that you can enjoy the graphics that go with this. So stop by and go ahead, Harold.
I say it was a pleasure, and I certainly enjoyed chit-chatting with you, Doug.
Well, I think I speak on behalf of everyone that listened in tonight that the pleasure was all ours. And again, we thank you so much for the many, many years of support that you provided. I mean, we started this thing, Don and I and others started this thing in the 90s, and you've been with us from the very beginning. So we owe a tremendous debt to you for all you've done. Thank you very much. And again, redtail.org. Thanks to everybody who tuned in this evening, and stop by the website, and you'll be able to see the recorded version. And with that, we'll close this out. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.